The arrests that shook the world, Gao Tai and Jackson Wang implicated in the death of Menglong. It began with a leak. No press conference. No official warning. Just a series of encrypted messages sent to investigative journalists across the globe, each carrying the same chilling phrase. The files are real. The names are real. The consequences imminent. Within hours, social media and news forums erupted in chaos. Speculation ran wild, rumors clashed with disbelief, and every corner of the internet buzzed with a single terrifying question: what had really happened to Menglong? Then came the images. CCTV stills, official-looking documents, and grainy clips showing two men, Gao Tai and Jackson Wang, being escorted in handcuffs through a stark, heavily guarded corridor. The captions read simply, "Arrested in connection to the death of Menglong." Even those who had followed the previous month's scandals involving secret recordings, hidden files, and whispered confessions could not have predicted this. The combination of fame, mystery, and the sudden, dramatic nature of the arrests made it unlike anything the public had ever witnessed. In the city, news vans swarmed the Supreme Court and police headquarters. Cameras captured every detail: the gleaming black shoes of the guards clicking against marble floors, the tense flinch of passers-by as the men were led past them, the cold glint of metal handcuffs. The courtroom itself, the next day, became a stage for drama that rivaled the scripts of the films both men had starred in, or the stories that Menglong had once breathed life into on screen. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Reporters whispered, some taking notes feverishly, others merely frozen in shock. Lawyers shuffled documents nervously, and court officers adjusted their positions, as if bracing for chaos. The two men entered separately, their faces unreadable masks, but their eyes betrayed fragments of fear, resignation, and, some speculated, defiance. Gao Tai's gaze swept the room slowly, scanning the faces, the cameras, the screens. Jackson Wang's expression remained stoic, but the slight twitch of his jaw betrayed the storm inside. The judge called the courtroom to silence, and in that heavy stillness, the first words fell like stones. Gao Tai, Jackson Wang, you are both under arrest for your connection to the death of Menglong, the judge said. You will remain in custody pending investigation. The words barely landed before Gao Tai raised his hand. I have something to say, he said, voice low but steady. Something the world needs to hear before judgment is passed. All eyes turned to him. The air seemed to thrum with tension, the kind that made every heartbeat audible. I did not act alone, Gao Tai began, his tone measured but heavy. And I did not act out of hatred or envy. What you are about to understand is far worse than any crime you can imagine because it began with fear, and fear, when untamed, is the deadliest force of all. Jackson Wang shifted slightly in his seat, glancing toward Gao Tai. There was a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes, a silent agreement that the story must be told. Gao Tai leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The camera lights glinted against the gold cufflinks he wore, glinting like the fragments of a life now fractured. Menglong discovered something, Gao Tai said slowly. Something that was never meant to be discovered. The files, recordings, secrets, truths about people, about systems, about power that should never have been exposed. And once he had them, he became a threat, not just to those who wished to remain hidden, but to everyone who thought the world could continue unchanged. He paused, letting the words sink in. Murmurs rippled across the room. Reporters scribbled faster. Even the guards shifted slightly, as though the air itself had thickened. He came to me first, Gao Tai continued. Not as a friend, but as a warning. He said, I can't stay silent. Even if it costs me everything, the truth must survive. Jackson Wang's voice broke and then, quieter, but cutting through the tension. He was right, Jackson said. We didn't understand it fully at first. We thought the files were just information, but they were much more than that. They were a reflection of a world built on lies, manipulation, and decisions that no one outside could comprehend. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The courtroom went silent. Every pair of eyes seemed to focus on the two men, hanging on their every word. What happened next? The judge asked. Gao Taiyu's eyes darkened. He refused to destroy the files, he said. He refused to hide. He refused to disappear quietly. And once he made that choice, everything became inevitable. He inhaled deeply, struggling to maintain control. The night he died, he said slowly, was not planned by either of us. It was a culmination of fear, confusion, and decisions made too late. There were moments when we believed we could protect him while containing the threat. We were wrong. Terribly wrong. Jackson Wang's voice rang out again, steady but heavy. We thought we could manage the consequences. We thought that if we could handle it quietly, if we could stay in control, no one would be harmed. But the system we were caught in, it doesn't forgive mistakes. A flashback began in Gao Taiyu's description, cinematic in its intensity. He painted the scene with detail so vivid that everyone in the courtroom could see it. Rain pattering on glass, the glow of streetlights, the quiet hum of a city that moved on, unaware. Menglong pacing a small apartment, speaking quietly but firmly about the hidden files. Conversations that blurred the line between warning and confrontation. Phones that rang in the shadows. Shadows that moved without sound. And then, Gao Taiyu said, voice dropping to a whisper, the accident happened. The term accident was almost theatrical, but in his delivery, it carried weight far beyond a simple mishap. There was horror. There was regret. There was a confession embedded in every syllable. He looked directly into the camera. The truth Menglong uncovered, it cannot die. And even though he is gone, the evidence, the files, the proof, it lives on. And that is why we are here. That is why you see two people arrested for his death. Because what they wanted to erase cannot be erased. Jackson Wang nodded, his gaze distant. People will not understand fully, he said. They will think this is a simple case, a crime of passion or misjudgment. But the reality is far more terrifying. It is about control, secrecy, and what happens when someone refuses to obey the silence imposed by power. The courtroom was tense to the point of suffocation. The press cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every flicker of emotion, every tremble of a hand. The air smelled faintly of fear and anticipation. And then, in an almost cinematic moment, Gao Taiyu's hands clenched into fists. If this story ends with us being punished, he said, voice rising, let it not erase what Menglong tried to protect. Let it not bury the truth that even those of us caught in the system cannot escape. The files, the secrets, they will survive. And someone, someday, will find them. Jackson Wang's eyes followed his, and for the first time, the room saw something else. Regret intertwined with defiance, despair intertwined with an unshakable knowledge of the truth's inevitability. The courtroom had emptied, but the weight of the first part of the story lingered like a storm that refused to break. Gao Taiyu and Jackson Wang had been led away in handcuffs, but their words, their confessions, and the terror of the unseen forces they spoke of remained suspended in the air. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and even the most seasoned observers felt a strange, physical chill. What had captured everyone's attention was not the arrests themselves, but the story they told in their brief, desperate moments on the stand. The public had only heard fragments, the fear, the secrets, the files Menglong had protected, but those fragments hinted at something far larger, far darker, and far more horrifying than anyone could imagine. Inside a dimly lit holding cell, Gao Taiyu sat on a metal bench, staring at the wall. The harsh fluorescent light flickered intermittently, throwing his shadow across the floor. He wasn't silent. He was replaying every moment leading up to the arrests, every step in the corridors, every whispered conversation that had led to that day. Jackson Wang sat across from him, head lowered, his fingers tapping lightly against his knees. The sound was almost hypnotic in the heavy silence. He had been calm on the stand, but now, alone, the full weight of what they were accused of pressed down on him like a vice. They can't understand it, Gao Taiyu murmured finally, breaking the silence. They think this is simple. They think it's crime, punishment, justice. But it's not. It's bigger than that. It always has been. Jackson lifted his eyes, dark rings under them from sleepless nights. It's all because of him, he said softly. Menglong. Everything he saw, everything he discovered, he refused to let it die quietly. That's what made this inevitable. Gao Tai leaned back, letting out a long, shuddering breath. I tried to stop him. I tried to make it end before it began. But you can't stop someone who believes in the truth more than their own life. He remembered the night in vivid detail, the storm outside, the rain pelting down on the city, streets glowing orange from neon signs blurred by the downpour. Menglong had stood under the dim light of a parking garage, calm, almost serene, as if he knew the storm was coming and had already made peace with it. In his hands, he carried the files. Not as paper, but as a promise, a warning, and a weapon. I begged him, Gao Tai continued, voice shaking. I said, please destroy it. Hide it. Forget it. I offered him a way out, a chance to survive. But he looked at me and said, even if I disappear, it will survive. Jackson's jaw tightened. That was the moment we realized it wasn't just about us. It wasn't about fear of discovery. It was about survival, of a truth they never wanted anyone to see. The files had been more than documents. They contained recordings, letters, evidence of decisions made in shadows, lives altered without notice, systems of power that operated unseen. And Menglong had found them. They were waiting for us, Gao Tai said, voice dropping to a whisper. Not just the authorities, but the people who built this system. They had been watching him, and then us. Every move, every conversation. They knew we couldn't stop it, and they didn't need to. Fear does the work for them. Jackson leaned forward, gripping his knees. And yet, we were the ones who made the mistake. We let ourselves get involved. We thought we could control it, that we could contain what he had seen. But you can't contain truth once it chooses a vessel. The two men sat in silence, the reality of the night's events pressing down on them. They weren't just facing legal consequences. They were facing the consequences of actions that had been set in motion long before they could intervene. Every whispered warning, every shadowed corridor, every secretive message that had reached them too late was a reminder that they were small players in a much larger game. Gao Tai's eyes fixed on the wall ahead, imagining the path that had led here. The hallways of power, the hidden rooms, the locked doors that no ordinary person would ever see. And in the center of it all, Menglong, calm in the eye of a storm he had never asked to be part of. He made a choice, Gao Tai said finally, almost to himself. A choice that none of us could honor or defy. And in doing so, he changed everything. Not just for us, but for everyone who might ever stumble across the truth. Jackson nodded slowly. And now we're part of it. Guilty or not, we're trapped in the consequences. The arrests, the public outrage, it's just the beginning. The story isn't over. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the layers of tension hidden behind closed doors. Neon lights flickered through the rain-streaked windows. Cars splashed through puddles on slick streets. The world seemed normal, indifferent, while inside that holding cell, two men sat haunted by the echoes of a life they could not save and a secret they could not undo. Do you think the files are safe? Jackson asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Gao Tai's gaze didn't leave the wall.
For now.
But nothing stays hidden forever. He made sure of that. And one day, someone will find them. A heavy silence fell again, punctuated only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors outside. In that silence, both men understood the horrifying reality. They were not just facing legal consequences. They were facing the shadow of a truth that refused to die, a legacy of courage and defiance that Menglong had left behind, hidden in places no one had yet thought to look. And somewhere in the city, in a quiet room far from the holding cell, the secret waited. Waiting to be found. Waiting to be revealed. Waiting to remind the world that even when the powerful try to silence it, truth has a way of surviving. Gao Tai leaned back and closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the night settle over him. Jackson remained seated, tense but silent. Outside, the The city lights glimmered through the rain, reflecting off wet streets like shards of glass. And in that moment, both men knew that the first revelation, the first arrest, the first confession, was only the beginning of a story that would haunt them and the world for years to come. The storm had passed, but its echoes were far from over.